Welcome to Millennial Dawn. In this presentation, the question that will be considered is, what happened after the death of Charles Taze Russell? The modern-day Watchtower Society has at various times written about the events that followed the pastor's death in various publications. This presentation will follow the historical narrative as presented in two of the Watchtower Society's publications, Jehovah's Witnesses Proclaimers of God's Kingdom and 2017 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses. These provide a brief history of events following Charles Taze Russell's death from the perspective of Jehovah's Witnesses. Other documents that will be referred to are Pastor Russell's Will, Joseph Rutherford's Harvest Siftings Part 1 and 2, Light After Darkness, Facts for Shareholders, and Harvest Siftings Reviewed, as well as certain other letters and publications. Charles Taze Russell died on a train near Pampa, Texas on October 31, 1916. Soon after the pastor's death, Mentor Sturgeon, who was Pastor Russell's personal attendant on his final trip, sent a telegram to his wife informing her of the pastor's death. It is reported that Alexander Hugh MacMillan intercepted the telegram. An article in the special history issue of the Herald of Christ's Kingdom by James Parkinson states the following: Mentor Sturgeon wired his wife that Pastor Russell had died. A.H. MacMillan intercepted the telegram at the Brooklyn Bethel home and wired Jospeh Franklin Rutherford, then at a convention in Oakland, Maryland, "The old man is dead." Rutherford came immediately to Brooklyn and took over. Mr. Parkinson's source for this quote is the late Mr. Frank Slukasma. It is unclear whether the statement "the old man is dead" was a slur or some sort of code to let Rutherford know that Charles Taze Russell had died. Confirming the existence of a telegram, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book states the following: A.H. MacMillan, who served as Russell's assistant in the office while Russell was away, later recalled the morning he read the telegram to the Bethel family. A moan went up all over the dining room. Some wept audibly. None ate breakfast that morning. All were greatly upset. At the end of the meal period, they met in little groups to talk and whisper, "What is going to happen now?" Here then begins a series of events that ultimately led to a split among the Bible students. The dispute centered around who should have control of the affairs of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, or, as the 2017 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses puts it, in the United States trouble began not long after Charles Taze Russell died. That issue was how the affairs of Jehovah's servants would be administered. Charles Taze Russell made, in his will of 1907, with slight adjustments made to it in 1908 and 1910, preparations for what should happen to the Watchtower Society and how the work of the ministry should be conducted in the event of his death. Charles Taze Russell had planned for his position as chief spokesman for the Bible students to be taken over by collective leadership. and he gave particular attention to the journal, the Watchtower, and how this should be managed by an editorial committee of 5. No article was to be published in this journal without the agreement of at least 3 members of the editorial committee of 5. The will reads, in part, an editorial committee of 5. I direct that the entire editorial charge of Zion's Watchtower shall be in the hands of a committee of 5 brethren, whom I exhort to great carefulness and fidelity to the truth. All articles appearing in the columns of Zion's Watchtower shall have the unqualified approval of at least 3 of the committee of 5. And I urge that if any matter approved by 3 be known or supposed to be contrary to the views of one or both of the other members of the committee, such articles shall be held over for thought, prayer and discussion for 3 months before being published, that, so far as possible, the unity of faith and the bonds of peace may be maintained in the editorial management of the journal. Those designated in his will to make up the 5-member editorial committee were W. E. Page, W. E. Vandenberg, H. Clay Rockwell, E. W. Brennason, and F. H. Robison. The will also specified the names of the 5 whom Charles Taze Russell suggested as possibly amongst the most suitable for which to fill vacancies in the editorial committee. These were as follows: A. E. Burgess, Robert Hirsh, Isaac Hoskins, George H. Fisher, J. F. Rutherford, and Dr. John Edgar. The declaration of 5 names, followed actually by 6 names, could possibly be because John Edgar of Scotland had died, although seemingly Rutherford's name should have appeared after Edgar's if that were added a codicil, or because as keeper of the will he added his own name, although whether or not Rutherford allowed others to see the will for themselves to confirm this is a question that remains unanswered. Interestingly, Rutherford was not named to the committee and was named only as one of 5 possible alternate members. Nevertheless, Rutherford was added to the editorial committee. A footnote on page 64 of the Proclaimer's book reads as follows: 5 members of the editorial committee were named in Russell's will. Page and Brennason, however, promptly resigned. Page because he could not take up residence in Brooklyn, and Brennason, later the spelling was changed to Brennason, because he had to take up secular work to support his family. Rutherford and Hirsh, whose names were listed in the December 1st, 1916 Watchtower, replaced them as members of the editorial committee. The book, Charles Taze Russell, Messenger of the Millennial Hope, states the following as respects the management of the Watchtower Corporation. Only incidental reference was made to the Watchtower Corporation, which he considered the necessary legal arm to carry on the business end of the work. For that purpose, he had already stipulated in its charter that it would be under the supervision of a board of directors consisting of 7 members. These were to have full control of the affairs of the corporation, with the officers selected by the board and responsible to it. It was understood by all that only in the pastor's lifetime would the president of the corporation, Pastor Russell, be able to appoint, technically to elect, the board of directors, in that he was its founder and controlled the necessary voting shares to perform this responsibility. The following extract from the article A Review of Events in the Truth Ministry since 1916 reads as follows. The will made collateral references to the continued functioning of the corporation, the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. It was provided in the charter of this corporation that it was to be managed by a board of directors consisting of 7 members, He had a far-sighted purpose in connection with the directors, as he wrote in a certain pamphlet published in 1894, entitled A Conspiracy Exposed in Harvest Siftings, that while he would control the society through his voting power and choice of directors, and that this was understood by the directors from the first, the real usefulness of the directors would come to the front in the event of his death. The vacancies in the board were to be filled by a vote of the majority of remaining members. Thus, the board of directors, continuing to direct the business activities of the harvest work, and the editorial board, as provided for in the will, be integrated into complete arrangements for the carrying on of the work which he could not personally perform after his death. My object in these requirements is to safeguard the committee, editorial, and the journal from any spirit of ambition or pride or headship, and that the truth may be recognised and appreciated for its own worth, and that the Lord may more particularly be recognised as the head of the Church and the fountain of truth. In the 24-page booklet entitled Light After Darkness, written by the 4 ousted directors, it is stated in part, in these quotations from the will, it is evident that Brother Russell expected no successor in his peculiar office as that wise and faithful servant, and he wished to safeguard the Watchtower so that there should be no opportunity for ambition, pride or headship. So it is equally true that Brother Russell never intended that anyone should succeed him in the full control of the Society's interests throughout the wide world, and doubtless for the same reason that he wished to keep down headship. This thought is evidenced in many ways and by his printed statements to this effect. In the event of my death, the Board of Directors will come forward. Also a quote from the Charter, section 6. The corporation is to be managed by a Board of Directors consisting of 7 members. Thus it will be seen that after Brother Russell's death, the Board of Directors became his successors in the control of the Society's affairs, as the Editorial Committee of 5 became his successors as editors of the Watchtower. A footnote on page 65 of the Proclaimer's book confirms that the Charter of the Watchtower Society provided for the Board of Directors be composed of 7 members, and that there were members of the Board already serving. It reads, "The Charter provides for the surviving members of the Board of Directors to fill a vacancy. So, 2 days after Russell's death, the Board of Directors met and elected A. Pearson to be a member. The 7 members of the Board at this point were A.I. Ritchie, W.E. Vandenberg, H.C. Rockwell, J.D. Wright, I.F. Hoskins, A.N. Pearson, and J.F. Rutherford. The 7-member board then elected the Executive Committee of 3. Charles Taze Russell had elected J.D. Wright as director in 1906. I.F. Hoskins became a director in 1908. A.I. Ritchie became a director in 1911 and was also vice president of the Society at the time Charles Taze Russell died. A.N. Pearson was elected to the board 2 days after Russell's death, while R.H. Hirsh became a director on March 29, 1917, replacing H.C. Rockwell, who had resigned his position. So it is clear that at this point some of those holding the positions of director had been in place for many years, and their votes were considered acceptable to the appointing of other directors, as well as forming an executive committee and the passing of certain bylaws. Charles Taze Russell, in his will, donated all of his voting shares to the Watchtower Society. This was done by nominating several trustees who were to serve for life. The will reads in part, "I have already donated to the Watchtower Bible Tract Society all my voting shares therein, putting the same in the hands of 5 trustees as follows: Sister E. Louise Hamilton, Sister Almeta M. Nation Robison, Sister J. G. Hur, Sister C. Tomlinson, and Sister Alice G. James. Those trustees shall serve for life. In the event of deaths or resignations, successors shall be chosen by the Watchtower Society Directors and Editorial Committee after prayer for divine guidance." Light After Darkness states in connection with the trustee arrangement, Paragraphs 15 and 16 are a very important part of the will, and reveal in part how our pastor arranged that his wishes in regard to the management of the society after his decease would be safeguarded, by arranging that his voting shares be used by 5 sisters to endeavour to elect only such men as President, Vice President and Secretary-Treasurer as they had good reason to think would closely follow the letter and spirit of the Charter and the will. Such an arrangement would surely commend itself to every right-intentioned person. You will be surprised to learn that our President almost at once took exception to this arrangement, and hinted that the whole will and arrangement was illegal. He procured a long legal opinion from a local firm of attorneys, which was used to prevent the sisters from voting the shares at the election at Pittsburgh on January 6th. James Parkinson states in the special history issue of the Herald of Christ's Kingdom, Pastor Russell's last will and testament left all his voting shares in the hands of 5 trustees. Rutherford convinced these 5 that it was contrary to the law for them to vote those shares, which constituted a majority of all shares. It is unclear whether Rutherford then proceeded in the name of the Watchtower to vote these shares himself, as he did in subsequent elections. So it was that, unsurprisingly, J.F. Rutherford had this arrangement of the faithful and wise servant, Charles Taze Russell, declared illegal. However, on occasions where it was beneficial to him, Rutherford apparently did not hesitate to use the voting shares. Incidentally, the question is posed in Light After Darkness. If the Sisters Committee, authorised by the will, has no legal existence, is it not true that the Editorial Committee, which has no authority for its existence, is equally illegal? Yet Rutherford for some time respected the arrangement for the Editorial Committee until around March 1, 1925, when the Editorial Committee objected to the publishing of one of his articles entitled Birth of a Nation. Quoting from his will again, "My object in these requirements is to safeguard the Committee, editorial, and the Journal from any spirit of ambition or pride or headship, and that the truth may be recognised and appreciated for its own worth, and that the Lord may more particularly be recognised as the head of the Church and the fountain of truth." In light of the arrangement Charles Taze Russell had clearly laid out in his will and the Charter, it is clear that he had no intention of passing on his authority or role intact to any individual successor. However, apparently Jospeh Franklin Rutherford had other plans. Jospeh Franklin Rutherford, in a 24-page document entitled Harvest Siftings, made the following illuminating statement regarding his thinking about how the society should be managed. For more than 30 years, the president of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society managed its affairs exclusively, and the board of directors, so-called, had little to do. This is not said in criticism, but for the reason that the work of the society peculiarly requires the direction of one mind. There are so many small details that if several persons had to direct them, more than half the time would be used in consultation. This was clearly demonstrated by the Executive Committee, and it was found that it took 3 men 2 hours a day what one could do in a third of the time, because of the time consumed in consultation about details, and these brethren on the committee worked in exact harmony at the same time. Thus it can be seen that Jospeh Rutherford believed that the work of the society peculiarly required the direction of one mind, and that mind should have, by all accounts, been his. On January 6, 1917, Jospeh Rutherford, aged 47, was elected president of the Watchtower Society, supposedly unopposed at a convention in Pittsburgh, although it is reported that various disputes had been taking place behind the scenes. There was also some surprise at Rutherford's unopposed and unanimous election, especially as many expected the then Vice President Ritchie to become the next president. Nevertheless, new bylaws were then adopted that strengthened the newly appointed president's authority. Apparently these bylaws, passed by both the Pittsburgh Convention and the Board of Directors, stated that the president would be the executive officer and general manager of the society, giving him full charge of its affairs worldwide. Initially, the 7-member Board of Directors for the Watchtower Society accepted these changes. However, 4 of the board members later withdrew their support for them. Disputes also arose over the interpretation of sections in the will of Charles Taze Russell, dealing with the future contents of Zion's Watchtower magazine, as well as whether or not anyone had authority to print new literature. The Editorial Committee, an arrangement in the will that Rutherford honoured for a time, eventually met its demise. Rutherford met resistance from the Editorial Committee in 1925 when he published his articles, Birth of a Nation. In the June 15, 1938 edition of the Watchtower, it is explained that this opposition was the beginning of the end of the Editorial Committee. In the December 1, 1931 edition of the Watchtower, it is stated that the Board of Directors saw no scriptural or other reason why an editorial committee should exist or appear in the Watchtower, and so by resolution they abolished the editorial committee. Apparently, the fact that this committee arrangement was laid out in the will of Charles Taze Russell was of no concern to Rutherford and his Board of Directors at that point. From October 15, 1931, the list of the names for the editorial committee was removed and replaced with a quote from Isaiah 54:13. The Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book states, in his will, Brother Russell outlined an arrangement for an editorial committee of 5 to determine the contents of the Watchtower. In addition, the Board of Directors of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society made arrangements for an executive committee of 3, A.I. Ritchie, W.E. Van Amberg, and J.F. Rutherford, to have general supervision of all the work of the Society, subject to the control of the Board of Directors. The preceding quote from the Proclaimer's book gives no indication that there was any problem or dispute in relation to the creation of this executive committee and the adopting of certain bylaws. However, was this really the case? Light After Darkness states regarding the matter of the bylaws proposed by Rutherford and the executive committee, the trouble really had its beginning before the election in Pittsburgh last January. Realising that he would be elected president of the Society, and knowing that the Charter places the control of the Society's interests in the hand of the Board of their Directors, Brother Rutherford, before he started for the election at Pittsburgh, prepared some bylaws to be placed before the Shareholders meeting. In this connection, it would be well to quote a part of the Charter of the Society respecting the only body authorised to make bylaws. Section 7 reads, "The corporation by its Board of Directors, not the voting shareholders, a majority of whom shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business, shall have full power and authority to make and enact bylaws, rules, and ordinances, which shall be deemed and taken to be the law of said corporation, and do any and everything useful for the good government and support of the affairs of said corporation." One of the proposed bylaws passed at the shareholders' meeting reads as follows: "The President of the Society shall always be the executive officer and general manager of the corporation, having in charge the management of its affairs and work, both in America and in foreign countries." Light After Darkness reads, in relation to the Committee of 3, "Another bylaw, the one to which the committee specially objected, authorised the President to appoint an advisory committee of 3. These bylaws and such a committee would naturally be thought by some to supplant the directors in their advisory and executive capacity." The shareholders approved of the new bylaws at the Pittsburgh Convention, although much dispute and controversy had taken place behind the scenes. However, the then President J.F. Rutherford knew the shareholders couldn't make legally binding bylaws, as the Charter gives the right exclusively to the directors. Section 7. The said corporation by its Board of Directors, a majority of whom shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business, shall have full power and authority to make and enact bylaws, rules, and ordinances, which shall be deemed and taken to be the law of said corporation, and do any and everything useful for the good government and support of the affairs of said corporation, provided that said bylaws, rules, and ordinances, or any of them, shall not be repugnant to this Charter, to the Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth. So Rutherford, upon his return to Brooklyn, called a meeting of the Board of Directors and presented his bylaws for adoption. Light After Darkness continues. Like the dear sheep who were in attendance at the shareholders' meeting, unsuspicious and anxious to do anything to aid the new president, the directors decided without protest to spread them upon the minutes of their meeting. It was this action that made the bylaws genuine and legal, an act which the board hoped at the time would prove to be for the best interest of the work. Thus it will be seen at a glance how Brother Rutherford planned to thwart Brother Russell's express wishes in this respect, and also the Charter, which places the control of the Society's interests in the hands of 7 brethren instead of 1. It is admitted even in the official history books of Jehovah's Witnesses that the arrangements for an executive committee of 3 was not part of Charles Taze Russell's vision for the Watchtower Society. This invention came from another mind, that of Jospeh Franklin Rutherford. By March 29, 1917, Henry Clay Rockwell had resigned, and Robert H. Hirsh had been elected as a director in his place, J.F. Rutherford having participated in electing Hirsh to that position. Brother Rutherford participated in many directors' meetings in Brooklyn of the Society, and he participated in the election of Brother Hirsh to fill the vacancy caused by the resignation of Brother Rockwell this year, and Brother Rutherford is not permitted to question it in law, and we must all agree that such inconsistency on his part is not at all commendable. These 4 directors have been accused of displaying an ambitious spirit due to their opposition to and efforts to overturn the then recently implemented bylaws. The 2017 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses states the matter in the following way. When Joseph F. Rutherford began taking the lead, a few prominent men in the organisation, including the 4 who were on the board of directors, exhibited an ambitious spirit. However, the position of their directors was basically that they were taking a stand for the arrangements of Charles Taze Russell that he had specified in his will and in his charter, the realisation of the full implications of passing Rutherford's bylaws, including the Executive Committee, recognising that these were not in harmony with Pastor Russell's will or charter, and that by these means Rutherford was stripping the directors of control and usurping all authority to himself that once rested solely in the hands of Charles Taze Russell. We wonder if the adversary has been busy in raising dust clouds to obscure these important truths, and to cover them up with the false accusations of ambition against the majority members of the Board of Directors. Time after time in Brother Rutherford's siftings we have been accused of seeking honour, positions, etc. Yet it should be evident to all that only Brother Rutherford's surmises are offered in support of these charges. Thus our earnest endeavours to do our duty and to stand in defence of our society and for the protection of its sacred interests have been so misrepresented as to appear to be evil. The history book published by Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, continues. Efforts to gain control. 4 members of the Board of Directors of the Society went so far as to endeavour to wrest administrative control from Rutherford's hands. This effort to gain control evidently refers to the efforts of these 4 directors to reverse the bylaws that had earlier been passed. The following is stated in Light After Darkness. It was not long till the directors recognised that a serious mistake had been made in adopting bylaws that placed the entire management in the President's hands, contrary to the Charter, although they endeavoured to cooperate with him in the direction of the affairs of the Society. Adding more dust clouds to the issue, Joseph Rutherford in Harvest Siftings goes to lengths to link what happened with a certain Paul Samuel Leo Johnson in London with the action of the 4 directors in the USA. The Watchtower Society, following his line of reasoning, wrote in the 2017 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, shortly before Brother Russell died, he had arranged to send Johnson to England as one of the organisation's travelling representatives. When he arrived in November 1916, the brothers in England welcomed him warmly. Sadly, the adulation he received began to warp his judgment, and he became convinced that he should be Brother Russell's successor. Without authority, Johnson dismissed some Bethel family members. He also tried to seize control of the organisation's bank accounts in London, at which point Brother Rutherford called him to the United States. Johnson returned to Brooklyn and tried to influence the Board of Directors, 4 of whom sided with him. For a full account of the events that occurred in Britain involving Pearsall Johnson and the alleged theft of $1,500, the injunction lawsuit, the supposed barricading of himself into his room at Bethel and exiting via his bedroom window, his claims to be Pastor Russell's successor, as well as the steward of Jesus' parable, based on Matthew 20 verse 8, etc., and whom Rutherford claimed at one point was insane, an accusation which Johnson also denied, while confirming he had suffered a breakdown from overwork and loss of sleep in 1910. It is recommended that each one read all of the available, admittedly lengthy documents related to this history for themselves, including PSL Johnson's publication, Harvest Siftings Reviewed. Rutherford stated in Harvest Siftings, Brother Johnson admitted to me that his appeal to the board is at the bottom of the trouble with brothers Ritchie, Hirsh, Wright and Hoskins. In about 2 days he came back and insisted that I call a meeting of the board of directors, that he might appear before them. I declined to do so, saying to him that the matter was entirely closed, the society would not send him back to England, and the best thing for him to do would be to remain quiet. When I firmly refused to call the board, he became agitated and said, "You are a usurper. I will appeal to the board and I will see that I have a hearing," or words to that effect. Johnson's Harvest Sifting Reviewed states in part, "These 5 board members, knowing well that I in the British matter are not the cause of their differences with Brother Rutherford, at the Boston Convention issued August 4th an open letter over their signatures in which the following occurs. Brother Johnson is in no sense the cause of the controversy between the President on the one side and brothers Pearson, Ritchie, Wright, Hoskins and Hirsh on the other side. The President's treatment of Brother Johnson is only one of the circumstances in which we could not approve of Brother Rutherford's course. Our contention is, he has been condemned without trial, and to our personal knowledge has been shamefully misrepresented and treated. Light After Darkness states, Brother Johnson's case not the issue. Doubtless some of our readers will ask, did not 4 brethren form a league with Brother Johnson and want to send him back to England? No, dear brethren, we had no such thought. It is in connection with this very point that the highest tide of error and misrepresentation is reached in Harvest Sifting. Throughout the paper, the directors are charged with having come under Brother Johnson's influence, so that they have espoused his course and made him their leader, and that they were intending to send him back to England, etc. From what we have said, foregoing in these pages, we believe that all can see that the coupling of Brother Johnson's affair, the Board of Directors, is an attempt to becloud the real issue and real trouble which existed before the return of Brother Johnson to America. Rutherford stated in Harvest Siftings, learning that it was the determination of these brothers, the 4 directors, to take charge of the society and run it or wreck it, which in my opinion would be the sure result if they did take charge, and knowing that they had no legal right to do so, I considered seriously what my steps should be. I consulted some prominent and wise brethren as to my course. I asked, shall I resign as president and let these opposing ones take charge? Each one of the brethren replied, Brother, the Lord put you where you are, and to resign or quit would be disloyal to the Lord. In Harvest Siftings Part 2, Rutherford stated, Permit me to say here that I have never for one moment denied or even questioned the right of the Board of Directors to control the affairs of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. The Board of Directors are now in control, but there is a vast difference between being in control and managing the details of the work of a corporation. Johnson, in Harvest Siftings Reviewed, supplement, stated in response, I must dissent from his statement that the board has always controlled, and that the issue was not whether it or he was controller in the Society's affairs. This was decidedly and unquestionably the issue. The issue was not whether he was executive and manager as distinct from controller. During Brother Russell's life, he and not the board was the controller as well as executive. During his lifetime, the board acted 1. in an advisory capacity and 2. in a sanctioning capacity, but it did not control. Only between Brother Russell's death and the board's passing the bylaw, making Brother Rutherford executive and manager, did the board control. More or less confusion exists by reason of the double use of the word manage, and Brother Rutherford takes full advantage of this confusion. It is evident from the foregoing that the directors initially supported Rutherford and his bylaws, but later felt they had made an error in judgment by passing them, effectively handing full control of the society to Rutherford, contrary to Pastor Russell's express will, and sought to correct that error. It is also evident that Pastor Russell, in his will in the Charter, was very clear that the directors should have executive control of the society, managing it after his death. The four directors continue their account of events in Light After Darkness, and their efforts to reverse the mistake they believe they made in passing the aforementioned bylaws. In view of all that had transpired in the months past, the directors decided that some action should be taken to undo the mistake in placing such sweeping power in Brother Rutherford's hands at the beginning of the year. The first step toward rectifying the matter was to repeal the bylaws, thus restoring to the board its authority as provided in the Charter. It was at the same time that Brother Johnson's affair came up for consideration. When he returned from England, he was given 2 hearings, in neither of which did he have a fair chance to present his case, and later, learning that there were complications that had not been brought out or adjusted, the directors gave assurance to Brother Johnson that they were in favour of his having a full and fair hearing. It was at this time when the board insisted upon giving the brother a further opportunity to explain his matters that Brother Rutherford censured the directors, telling them that the management was in his hands and that it was none of their business, that he himself had settled Brother Johnson's affair. Thus the real issue, the management of the society, came to the front and led to the resolution to repeal the bylaws. The Watchtower, in its history book, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, suggests that the 7th volume, The Finished Mystery, brought the situation between Rutherford and the directors to a head. It reads in part, "The situation came to a head in the summer of 1917 with the release of The Finished Mystery, the 7th volume of Studies in the Scripture. Following his, Charles Taze Russell's, death, the Executive Committee of the Society arranged for 2 associates, Clayton J. Woodworth and George H. Fisher, to prepare this book. In part it was based on what Russell had written, and other comments and explanations were added. A completed manuscript was approved for publication by officers of the Society and was released to the Bethel family on Tuesday, July the 17th, 1917. Rutherford, in Harvest Siftings Part 1, gives his account, which reads in part, "In the Bethel dining room at the noon hour on Tuesday, June 17th, I stated that the 7th volume was there to be distributed to any that desired it, and immediately thereafter the attacks began upon me by brothers Hirsh and Hoskins. The compilation of the 7th volume had been in progress since shortly after the death of Brother Russell. I was about to submit the printer's proofs to these and other brethren at the time this trouble arose, but seeing their violent opposition, I knew that the publication would be long delayed if they insisted on reading the manuscript and giving objections first. The account given regarding the 7th volume and how it came to be highlights one of the concerns of the directors about how this executive committee of 3 effectively supplanted the board of directors. At any rate, in Light After Darkness, the directors provide their response. It reads in part, "None of the directors knew anything about the issuing of the 7th volume in advance of the time it was given out. Further, the matter of the 7th volume was entirely outside the issue under discussion on that occasion. None of the brethren accused of being murmurers said anything about the 7th volume, nor did they entertain any feelings against the volume. None of their statements were complaints or in defence of themselves, but they simply protested in the name of the Lord against the false charges and high-handedness of the President's methods, against his gross violations of the Charter of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society and Brother Russell's will. It was the solemn duty of these trustees to make this protest on that occasion. We repeat, not once did we refer, either in thought or word, to the volume." Some time before this, on June 20th, 1917, a meeting of the Board of Directors was held with the purpose of rescinding the bylaws that were passed at an earlier date. This planned recension apparently being the endeavour to wrest administrative control from Rutherford's hands, as mentioned in the history book of the Watchtower Society. Rutherford, in Harvest Siftings Part 2, states the following. About June 1917, at a meeting of the Board of Directors, one of the brethren introduced a resolution to repeal the bylaws and to take the management of the society out of the hands of the President, where it had been for 33 years, and where the shareholders expressly stated it should continue to be. Rutherford maintained that he had the right to manage or control the society in the same way that Charles Taze Russell had done, despite needing the board to pass his bylaws at an earlier date to grant him that authority. Here's how Johnson provides in his Harvest Siftings Reviewed. A supplement which provides clarification on the subject of manager and controller. It reads in part: a board as controller initiates all matters of policy and programme, i.e., what is to be done and the ways and means to do it. It also makes bylaws, rules and ordinances. It also passes on all acts of the officials, approving, disapproving, rescinding, modifying or adding to them as it sees fit. An executive carries out the policy and programme and usually acts as the board's intermediary with others. A manager supervises the office or shop and general details. In their relation to one another, a manager is subject to an executive, and an executive is subject to a board. The word manager is sometimes used to designate the work of a manager, and sometimes a controller. Our Charter and the majority of the board, in Light After Darkness, use the word manage in the sense of control, and the word management in the sense of controllership. These four brothers differed from Brother Rutherford, and I share their opinion, because he insisted on interpreting the word management as it occurs in the bylaws that he drew up, in the sense of controllership, and acted in harmony with this interpretation. If it is asked whether the issue was one of management as distinct from controllership, the answer is emphatically no. The issue was, who is controller, the board or Brother Rutherford? The majority of the board, which includes Brother Pearson, claimed controllership for the board. Brother Rutherford, both by word and act, claimed controllership for himself. To be clear, the issue was about who had control over the society, the board or the president. The board, as has previously been seen, empowered the president by passing his bylaws. It can be wondered then whether the board were really making efforts to gain control, or actually efforts to regain the control they perhaps unwisely gave away. At any rate, the four directors proceeded to present Rutherford with a resolution to rescind the bylaws, Light After Darkness reads. This meeting on June 20th was the last meeting ever held by the directors over which Brother Rutherford presided. When the resolution came up, the president raised such a storm of opposition that the brethren yielded to his appeal to hold the resolution over until the next meeting, which was announced for July 20th. Although 2 or 3 requests were subsequently made for a meeting prior thereto, these were refused by the President until July 17th. Rutherford had at that point been alerted to the fact that the directors of the Society were moving to rescind the bylaws they had earlier passed. This action to rescind these bylaws is, as is stated in the book Jehovah's Witnesses Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, oddly considered to be the effort to gain control of the Society by the 4 directors. Light After Darkness continues. The President now realised that the directors were fully awake to their responsibilities. He was determined, however, that they should never acquire and use the power delegated to them in the Charter. The President took a trip to Philadelphia to consult a lawyer. Little did we realise how the adjustment would be made. His design was that upon the advice of his Philadelphia lawyer, he would declare illegal the board of directors through whom Brother Russell had been doing illegal business for so many years. On his homeward journey he visited Pittsburgh and appointed brethren to take our place, whom no doubt he felt certain would never attempt to rescind his bylaws, as this was his only cause for complaint against us. At the noonday meal in the Bethel dining room on July 17th, Brother Rutherford made the startling announcement to all gathered that the directors of the Society had never been legally elected, and that he had declared the offices of 4 of them vacant, and appointed new ones in their place. It was on July 17, 1917 when Rutherford made his move against the 4 directors. Of this date, the Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book triumphantly declares, on Tuesday, July 17, 1917, a startling announcement was made. The 4 opposing directors had been removed, and Brother Rutherford had appointed 4 others to fill the vacancies. The 4 directors claimed that Rutherford did not have the legal authority to remove them from the board, whereas Rutherford, having obtained his legal opinion in the interim, after discovering that the 4 directors were moving to rescind the bylaws, argued that he did have the legal right. The Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses states, the law required that each member of the board of directors be elected annually by members of the corporation. However, at the annual meeting of the corporation on January 6, 1917, only 3 members of the board, Joseph Rutherford, Andrew N. Pearson and William E. Vandenberg were elected. They filled the positions of President, Vice President and Secretary-Treasurer respectively. No election was held for the remaining 4 positions on the Board of Directors. The men who had held those positions, the 4 opposers, had been elected to the board in the past, and it was understood by some that they would hold those positions for life. However, because they had not been re-elected at the annual meeting, they were actually not legal members of the board at all. So in July 1917, Brother Rutherford exercised his right to appoint 4 faithful men to fill the vacant board positions. The Charter of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society clearly states that the directors hold their position for life. Besides, Rutherford had worked with these supposedly illegal directors for about 6 months without issue before ousting them, and they determined to rescind his bylaws in an attempt to bring the society back into harmony with Pastor Russell's will and charter. James Parkinson, in the special history issue of Herald of Christ's Kingdom, writes regarding this event: Rutherford's efforts to establish control met with increasing resistance from the majority of the board. On July 17, 1917, Rutherford claimed the Watchtower Bible Tract Society charter provided for the election of directors annually. Thus only the 3 officers of the board, elected January 6th, were legally members of the board. So he appointed A.H. MacMillan, G.H. Fisher, J.H. Bonnet, and W.E. Spill to replace Ritchie, Wright, Hoskins and Hirsh. The board majority, joined by F.H. McGee, counted that officers of the board cannot be elected unless they are first members of the board. Therefore, there are either 7 members or no members. Both sides purchased legal opinions to support their claims. The ousted members decided not to institute legal proceedings following 1 Corinthians 6, 6 and 7. Francis H. McGee, who was an assistant to the New Jersey District Attorney at the time, whose name for some reason isn't mentioned directly at all in Rutherford's papers, was widely known to the Bible students and had been consulted with by Charles Taze Russell on a few occasions. In his expert legal opinion, Rutherford was in error in his interpretation of law. In Light After Darkness, Brother McGee stated, "The Pennsylvania courts have held that the directors shall elect, as the statute provides, directors to fill vacancies until the next shareholders' election for the directors in the manner provided in the Charter and bylaws, and have said that directors may not declare other directors' offices vacant and then fill the vacancies. If that be so, it is clear that the president of the society may not do what the directors may not do, if for no other reason than that there would be no expiration of the required 30 days in which the directors must first elect to fill vacancies, and because the statute requires the directors to fill vacancies in the manner provided by the society, and it is doubtful if the president may at any time appoint directors to fill vacancies. He certainly cannot do that which the law forbids directors to do. Nothing but the judgment of a court could declare the offices vacant." It is worthy of note at this point to consider that A.H. MacMillan, an ardent supporter of Rutherford, had long in mind the removal of and replacement of the directors, even contemplating their removal during the funeral of Charles Taze Russell. As an example of the turn of mind on the part of Brother MacMillan, the brother approached Brother Hoskins at the time of Brother Russell's funeral in Pittsburgh, November 6th, and only a few feet removed from the dead body of our pastor, Brother MacMillan said, "Brother Hoskins, I have something to say to you that I know will hurt you very much. I haven't any idea that you have strength of character sufficient to follow my advice, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I think every one of you directors, except Brothers Rutherford and Vandenberg, ought to resign, and give a chance for some decent men who know something to be put in your places. There is not one of you fit to manage anything, and you ought to resign. And if you don't resign, you will, every one of you, get kicked out." A.H. MacMillan never denied this account that Isaac Hoskins gave. The Watchtower Society's official account, as found in the Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book, continues, "Brother Rutherford had a sound basis for the action he had taken. How so? It turns out that although the 4 opposing directors had been appointed by Brother Russell, these appointments had never been confirmed by vote of the corporation members at the annual meeting of the Society. Therefore, the 4 of them were not legal members of the board of directors at all. Rutherford had been aware of this, but had not mentioned it at first. Why not? He wanted to avoid giving the impression that he was going against Brother Russell's wishes. However, when it became evident that they would not discontinue their opposition, Rutherford acted within his authority and responsibility as president to replace them with 4 others whose appointments were to be confirmed at the next annual meeting, to be held in January 1918. It is of interest to note that Pastor Russell removed directors in 1894 and also 1908. For this episode, P.S.L. Johnson wrote, "Brother Russell did not take the law into his own hands and oust them, but in a legal and orderly way waited until the next annual meeting of the shareholders, when he recommended and procured their dismissal by the way laid down in the Charter. Had Brother Rutherford followed this appropriate example, the society would not have been wrecked, nor would 5 faithful brothers have been slandered worldwide, nor the church so greatly disturbed." According to Paul Johnson's account, he attempted to mediate between Rutherford and the directors, but Rutherford failed to keep his promises, one example being his refusal to provide a copy of the legal opinion he had obtained in Philadelphia to the 4 directors for their own counsel to study. P.S.L. Johnson, in Harvey Sifting's Reviewed, stated the following regarding the validity of the directors' appointments and what it meant for Rutherford. "The reason why Brother Russell was never but once elected a director is the same as that for which no other director, including Brothers Rutherford and Vanamberg, was ever elected but once, i.e., the Charter expressly states that the directors shall hold office for life. Again, if the places of the 4 brothers were vacant by reason of their not having been annually elected, then Brothers Rutherford and Vanamberg's places likewise were vacant. Therefore, since the Charter states that the Society's officers shall be chosen from among its directors, they could not have been candidates for the presidency and secretary-treasuryship, and therefore could not have been elected as such. Therefore their places on both the board and in these offices would also be vacant. Therefore Brother Rutherford would not have power bindingly to declare the places of the 4 vacant and appoint successors. If, as he says, he knew for years of the vacancies of the places of those who were holding directorship for years without an annual re-election, he knew, for the same reason, for years, that his place too was vacant on the board. Yet in the December the 15th, 1916 Tower, last paragraph page 390 and first and second paragraphs page 391, he enumerates not vacancies but 7 members of the board, himself among them, and shows that the officers must, in harmony with the Charter, be selected from among these 7 directors, none of whom according to his mind were directors, for the 6, not being elected for years and their places thus being vacant, would not elect the 7th, Brother Pearson. Doubtless a court would call his conduct fraudulent, especially as he thereby became gainer. If their places were vacant, there could have been no quorum present at any board meeting after his election as president. Therefore all the acts of the board since January the 6th would be null and void, including the bylaws giving him executive and managerial authority. He would now be using fraudulent powers. Courts would no doubt rule that since he acted with the 4 as genuine directors for nearly 6 months, he could not call in question the legality of their directorship. He is tied hand and foot. Hence there was no vacancy on the board, and Brother Rutherford's actions was not simply filling 4 vacancies, it was an illegal and disorderly appointing of 4 pseudo-directors. It is beyond the scope of this presentation to examine in minute details all the various claims and counterclaims made by the 2 parties. However, what follows is a letter sent out by the 4 directors, dated July the 27th, addressing some of the legal claims made by Rutherford and others. Pause the presentation to read it if you so desire. Rutherford, in Harvest Siftings, stated plainly, "The Charter also provides that the Board of Directors shall hold office for life, but this part of the Charter is contrary to the Statute of Pennsylvania, which provides that he shall hold for 1 year." However, he also stated during his oration at Charles Taze Russell's funeral regarding the Charter, "The work grew to great proportions, and, desiring that it might be conducted in a systematic manner and perpetuated after his death, he organized the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, corporation, the charter of which was written by his own hand, and is admitted, by men who know, to be a most remarkable document." J.F. Rutherford, in his Harvest Siftings Parts 1 and 2, put forward various creative arguments as to why he was legally permitted to remove and replace the 4 deposed directors, 3 of which had been appointed directly by Charles Taze Russell and served for many years. What now follows is a letter, a legal opinion from Davies, Auerbach and Cornell, legal counsel of the 4 ousted directors, dated July 23, 1917, which debunks Rutherford's legal arguments. It reads as follows: New York, July 23, 1917. Gentlemen, you have requested our opinion concerning your present title to office as Directors of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, and concerning the views as to the law expressed by Mr. Rutherford in his statements of facts and points, a copy of which you have received. As to the proposition which is so much emphasized in Mr. Rutherford's statements, that even if his course of conduct in ousting, as he claims, you 4 gentlemen, the majority of the board, from your directorship, was wrongful and in violation of the law, the matter cannot be redressed in the New York courts. It is enough to point out that he, in his own statement, says, in 1909, said Watchtower Bible Tract Society removed its activities from the state of Pennsylvania to the state of New York, and since that time it has transacted no business of consequence in the state of Pennsylvania, and never had a meeting of its board of directors in said state during that time. If this be so, it goes without saying that the courts of the state of New York have ample jurisdiction to see to it that the affairs of the corporation, which, according to Mr. Rutherford's own admission, are being conducted almost entirely within the state of New York, are not taken out of the hands of the majority of its board of directors and turned over to other men whom the president chooses to appoint and regard as directors. No lawyer familiar with the New York law would have any difficulty in finding legal methods of preventing the usurpers from exercising control over the affairs of the corporation in this state. The second proposition in Mr. Rutherford's statements, to wit, that the affairs of the corporation could not be brought before the courts of the state of New York, because it is not registered in this state, would involve, if true, very disastrous consequences for the corporation, in view of Mr. Rutherford's own admission that all of its affairs are being substantially transacted in this state. If in truth it be an outlaw here, if in truth its affairs are not under the protection of the state of New York, it is easy to see that the corollary of the proposition that it is not competent to be sued in the court of this state is that for the same reason it is not competent to sue, and that in consequence its affairs, its property and its good name are at the mercy of any individual who seeks to disregard its rights, or who undertakes to seize control of its affairs in disregard of the constituted board of directors, whose presence in office had expressed the will of Pastor Russell and of the membership of the corporation for years. As a matter of law, however, it is utterly fallacious to say that because the statutes of this state provide no means for registering a foreign membership corporation, that therefore such corporation in transacting affairs here is not subject to the courts of this state. All corporations may lawfully carry out within this state the purposes of their charters, and may exercise such powers incidental thereto as may be fairly necessary, unless otherwise forbidden by the laws of this state, and the requirements of the statutes of this state for registry apply only to foreign stock corporations. That the Watchtower Bible Tract Society is not a foreign stock corporation within the meaning of the statutes of this state is shown by the following definition in section 3 of the General Corporation Law. Stock corporation is a corporation having a capital stock, divided into shares, and which is authorised by law to distribute to the holders thereof dividends or shares of the surplus profits of the corporation. The corporation is not a stock corporation because of having issued certificates called certificates of stock, but which are in fact merely certificates of membership, and which is not authorised by law to distribute to its members any dividends or shares of profits arising from the operations of the corporation. Pastor Russell, therefore, was not so well advised as to the law that in conducting the affairs of the corporation in this state since 1909, as Mr. Rutherford himself says, he committed the mistake of placing those affairs outside of the protections of the courts of justice. The third proposition made by Mr. Rutherford is that the provisions in the Charter of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, approved in 1884 and still incorporated in the said charter, that the members of the Board of Directors shall hold their respective offices for life is invalid, since the statute of the State of Pennsylvania, providing that the directors shall be chosen annually by the stockholders or members, is said to be applicable to this corporation. It is a little surprising that one who for years was connected with the management of this corporation should not have discovered this alleged illegality until after the death of Pastor Russell, and then for the first time should bring forward a claim which is well calculated to subvert the whole scheme of government as planned and designed by Pastor Russell, and should use that claim to justify the possession of power in himself alone to oust a majority of the board of directors and to fill their places, notwithstanding that a number of the persons whom he thus seeks to exclude held that office for years with the acquiescence and approval both of Pastor Russell and of the members of the corporation. In this connection, it is significant that the Charter of the Society is endorsed, as required by Pennsylvania law, with a certificate of an Associate Judge of the Commons pleased that such judge has examined the Charter and found that the same to be lawful and not injurious to the community, that therefore the incorporators and their associates are entitled to have leave to be a corporation for the purposes and upon the terms therein stated. Even if, however, an election or appointment for life could not lawfully be made, your right to office would not be in any way affected, since no successors to you have been chosen by members of the corporation. Assuming for the sake of argument that, as Mr. Rutherford claims, the Pennsylvania statutory provisions that directors shall be chosen annually by the stakeholders or members has some application to this corporation, there would then come into play the very next clause in the statute, to wit, that such directors or trustees shall hold their office until others are chosen and qualified in their stead. As the members of the corporation have never chosen anyone in your place, your terms of office would, the statutes cited by Mr. Rutherford were applicable, be extended beyond the expiration of 1 year until such a time as successors chosen, not by Mr. Rutherford, but by members of the corporation should qualify. Even if the term for which you had been elected were longer than the law allowed, you would not thereby be disqualified from holding office during the lawful period. Furthermore, this provision of statute that directors do not lose office solely because of failure of the members of the corporation to appoint their successors, but continue until such a time as the successors have been appointed, qualified, is merely expressive of the common law rule on the subject, and hence would be applicable to your case, even though the statute which we have been discussing be not applicable to the corporation. As to the claim that at least 3 directors must be residents of the state of Pennsylvania, it would seem to be enough to reply that if this be so, the defect in title to office would apply to the entire board of directors, and not merely to such individual members thereof as Mr. Rutherford, not himself a resident of Pennsylvania, might choose to consider affected by such disqualifications. We are, however, unable to find any provision of Pennsylvania law enacted when this charter was adopted, or which affects this charter which makes it mandatory that a certain number of directors in a membership corporation, as this one, shall be residents of the state of Pennsylvania. As to the claim that Mr. Rutherford as president is the executive officer and general manager of the corporation, and as such has the legal right to manage the corporation, we cannot but feel that the conclusion which is sought to be reached from the development of this claim, to wit, that as manager he may fill the board of directors with his own appointees, is founded on the use of the word manager in a double sense. The term manager of a corporation is the title of an office thoroughly well known to the law and in the business community, and it has never been thought before that this office was in any way connected with the appointing of directors. It has to do solely with the executive management, and the manager is the representative and executive officer of the directors, and not their overlord or source of power. The argument that the incumbent of the office of manager has the legal right to manage the corporation is of course unsound, if the word manage is meant to imply the exercise of all the powers of the corporation, including the right to appoint directors. As to the filling of vacancies, it is enough to say that if Mr. Rutherford is right in his contention that certain portions of the Charter are invalid because of the statute of laws of Pennsylvania as to corporation, then he is wrong in his contention that as president or manager of the society he has the right to fill vacancies, because this very statute expressly provides that in the case of the death, removal or resignation of the president or any of the directors, treasurers or other officers of any such company, the remaining directors may supply the vacancy thus created until the next election. Furthermore, even aside from this statute and taking the Charter solely by itself, he has no right to fill your places, since vacancies have not occurred in your respective offices, and also because in the event of any such vacancy, it would have been his duty, or the duty of any other president, to call the board together in a special meeting, and he could not deprive the board of such power and obtain it for himself, merely for failing to call a special meeting for such purpose. But even if for any reason your original title to office might have legal defects, you, or at least 3 of you, have been in office for so long, and your title to office has been so long recognised by the entire membership of the corporation and by its late president, that you are now de facto directors, even if not de jure directors. Finally, it is important to observe that if the provisions of the Pennsylvania statute that directors shall be chosen annually had the effect which Mr. Rutherford claims, to wit, as rendering vacant the office of every director at the end of 1 year, he himself would have no title to his office as director or president, for the Charter requires that the president shall be chosen from among the members of the board annually. Mr. Rutherford claims that because he was elected by members of the corporation to be president, such election constituted impliedly an election of him as director, although he was not expressly so elected. This claim has been overruled by our Court of Appeals in a similar case. If he were not in fact a director, the mistake of the members of the corporation in supposing that he was already a director, and therefore eligible to be president, would not render him eligible in law to be president, or constitute him a lawfully elected director. For this and other reasons, we are of the opinion that the propositions of law advanced by Mr. Rutherford would, if sound and pushed to their logical conclusion, defeat his own title to office as director and president. Yours very truly, Davies, Auerbach and Cornell. Ultimately, despite the best efforts of the deposed directors, Rutherford eventually prevailed. Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book states, the opposers' efforts to gain control had failed. The Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book continues. On August the 8th, the disgruntled ex-directors and their supporters left the Bethel family. They had been asked to leave because of the disturbance they had been creating. The 4 directors chose to leave Bethel after receiving threats from Rutherford. Pearson was also able to obtain some small expenses for them. Light After Darkness states, a few days later, after repeated threats by the presidents to forcibly accomplish their rejection from the home, 4 directors, though they considered the Bethel their home, and as having the same right there as Brother Rutherford and others, decided to submit to the injustice of Brother Rutherford's orders, and have since gone forth from the home. It was as a result of Brother Pearson's negotiation and intercession that Brother Rutherford, after threatening to force our rejection, agreed with him to make an allowance to cover the expenses of the brethren leaving the home. The sum was $300, but in no sense did it represent an adjustment of matters, but merely as making some provision for brethren who, after long years of service, now without means, are about to be forced out into the world to start life anew. To justify this drastic and violent action toward his brethren, in thrusting them from the home that had sheltered them during the long years they had laboured harmoniously with Brother Russell, Brother Rutherford and his associates say that it was done because we were disturbing the Bethel family and the work, and therefore done for the good of the cause. We derive comfort from Isaiah's prophecy quoted in the photodrama. Your brethren that hated you, that cast you out for my name's sake, said, Let the Lord be glorified, but he shall appear to your joy, and they shall be ashamed. A special history issue of Herald of Christ's Kingdom write, both sides purchased legal opinions to support their claims. The ousted members decided not to institute legal proceedings following 1 Corinthians 6 and 7. There are some that wonder how Jospeh Franklin Rutherford's final vote count amounted to 194,106 votes, the amount shown in the Watchtower 1918 Annual General Meeting report, as it is estimated that there were approximately only 164,000 shares available. This figure is extrapolated from the total number of votes shown for the 1918 Annual General Meeting report divided by the 7 members, and from the approximately 150,000 shares voted in the 1917 Annual General Meeting report, Watchtower, January 15, 1917, contributions received in 1917 amounted to $219,545.41. This limits additional new shares to 21,954 and likely much less. As was mentioned earlier, Brother Russell willed his voting shares to 5 sisters, but Rutherford insisted that this trustee arrangement as provided for in the will was illegal, and therefore they could not vote Brother Russell's shares. Yet, it appears that in 1917, Rutherford voted Brother Russell's shares for himself, and probably others with unannounced cumulative voting also. James Parkinson, in the special history issue of Herald of Christ's Kingdom, writes in relation to the 1918 annual meeting, the Watchtower proxies for January 5, 1918 annual meeting were solicited with power of attorney, granting the proxy holder the right to override the designated vote. About 13% of the votes recorded were for M. Sturgeon, A.I. Ritchie, H.C. Rockwell, I.F. Hoskins, R.H. Hirsh, J.D. Wright, and W.J. Hollister. The convention then voted to ask R.H. Hirsh to resign from the Editorial Committee. Thus, when the shareholders met, Rutherford was re-elected as president, and various others were appointed as directors, etc. The 4 ousted directors received only a small percentage of the votes. Even Vice President Pearson, who had wavered in his support of the judge, failed to maintain a position on the board of directors. The 4 deposed directors and Johnson had, therefore, to submit to Rutherford and his associates or separate permanently. They chose the latter course. At this point, the Bible student movement split, with some of those who separated from Rutherford's regime setting out to carry on the work outside of the Watchtower Society. For more information about what happened to the Bible student movement from that point, see the special history issue of the Herald of Christ's Kingdom, which can be found online. Other publications of interest that can be purchased online are Separate Identity, Organizational Identity Among Readers of Zion's Watchtower, Volume 1, and Separate Identity, Organizational Identity Among Readers of Zion's Watchtower, Volume 2, Culture and Organization, both by B.W. Schultz. Also, the book Charles Taze Russell, Messenger of the Millennial Hope by Charles F. Redeker, which can be found online. As has been seen, Rutherford, by trying to act as Russell had, effectively ignoring Russell's expressed wishes as outlined in his will, resulted in dissensions and schisms worldwide. Furthermore, Had Rutherford ever been taken to court for dismissing the 4 directors, it is very likely that he would have lost. His claims that the 4 directors were not legally elected does not bear up under closer examination, particularly in the case of Robert Hirsh, who was not an appointee of Charles Taze Russell and had even for a time been a supporter of J.F. Rutherford. As was seen, the ousted directors' lawyers and P.S.L. Johnson all pointed out, if the directors were not legally elected, neither were the Society's 3 officers, Rutherford, Pearson and Van Amberg. In order to have been chosen officers in January 1917, they would have had to have been legally elected directors, yet they had not been, and hence, by Rutherford's own logic, did not hold office legally. The Watchtower Society of today persists in misrepresenting the events that occurred back then, and continues to slander the various brethren involved. Those 4 directors asked the following question. The real issue, dear friends, is, are we to remain faithful to Brother Russell's memory and his methods and his plans for the work? Did Joseph Rutherford and those that followed him, as well as those who represent the Watchtower Bible Tract Society today, remain faithful to Pastor Russell's memory, methods and his plan for the work, as outlined in his will and charter? J.F. Rutherford sought to make further changes to the organisational structure of the Watchtower Society. This process resulted in the stripping of autonomy from once independent classes of Bible students under the centralised authority of the Society. Elders once elected by a local vote of the congregation members were appointed by the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book states, in 1932, the Watchtower contained a 2-part article entitled Jehovah's Organisation. This showed that the elective office of elders in the congregation was unscriptural. One of their number, nominated by the congregation, was appointed by the Society to be the service director. This was done in defiance of the recommendations as found in the 6th volume of Studies in the Scriptures written by Pastor Russell, as well as the scriptural method outlined, stretching out the hand, ordaining elders in every ecclesia, and when they had ordained them elders in every church, ecclesia, and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord. Acts 14:23. The form of this statement, with other frequent references to elders in connection with other churches, justifies the inference that this was the invariable custom in the early church. The term elders, as seen in the text, includes evangelists, pastors, teachers and prophets or public exponents. Hence, it is important that we learn what is meant by the word ordained. At the present time, this word is generally used in reference to a ceremony of installation, but this is not the significance of the Greek word retonio used in this text. It means to elect by stretching out the hand, still the usual form of voting. This definition is given in Professor Young's Analytical Bible Concordance. As that may be considered a Presbyterian authority, we will give also the definition set forth in Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, which may be considered a Methodist authority. The latter defines the root of the word a hand reacher or voter by raising the hand. A totally different Greek word is used when our Lord declares of the apostles, I have chosen you and ordained you, the same word as tithemi, used by the apostle when speaking of his ordination. He says, but this ordination, the apostle distinctly declares, was not of men nor by man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father. All of the members of the anointed body, united with the head and partakers of his Spirit, are thereby similarly ordained, not indeed to apostleship like Paul, but to be ministers, servants of the truth, each to the extent of his talents and opportunities. 12 only were ordained to be apostles or special representatives, ministers plenipotentiary. Returning to the ordination or recognition of elders by the vote of the congregation, ecclesia, of the new creation, by stretching forth the hand as seen above, we note that this was the customary mode, for the apostle uses the same Greek word in telling how Titus became his helper. He says, "He was also chosen of the church to travel with us." The words italicized are from the Greek word keratonio, which, as above shown, signifies to elect by stretching out the hand. And further, the word also here implies that the apostle himself was chosen by a similar vote. Not chosen or elected to be an apostle, but to be a missionary, a representative of the churches on this occasion, and doubtless at their expense. Priestcraft and not the teachings of our Lord and his 12 apostles is responsible for the division of the saints into two classes called clergy and laity. It is the spirit of priestcraft and antichrist that still seeks to lord it over God's heritage in every way possible, proportionately to the density of the ignorance prevailing in any congregation. The Lord and the apostles recognize not the elders, but the church, ecclesia, as the body of Christ. And whatever dignity or honour attaches to faithful elders, as servants of the Lord and the Church, is not merely their recognition of themselves, nor their recognition by the elders. The congregation choosing must know them, must recognise their Christian graces and abilities in the light of God's Word, else they can grant them no such standing or honour. No elder therefore has any authority by self-appointment. Indeed, the disposition to ignore the Church, the body of Christ, and to make himself and his judgment superior to the whole, is first-class evidence that such a brother is not in the proper attitude to be recognised as an elder. Humility and a recognition of the oneness of the ecclesia as the Lord's body being prime essentials for such a service. Nor should any brother assume public duties in the Church as leader, representative, etc., without an election, even though assured that there is no question respecting his acceptability. The scriptural method of ordaining elders in all churches is by congregational election, by stretching forth the hand in a vote. To insist on such an election before serving is to follow scriptural order. Those who supported the elective elder arrangement were from then on considered part of an evil slave class, and even referred to on one occasion as being parasites. From 1917 to 1941, Rutherford produced a flood of publications, around 24 books, 86 booklets, and an annual yearbook, and also articles for the Watchtower and a magazine called The Golden Age, later named Consolation. Rutherford's booklet, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, contains some of the earliest doctrinal changes. What follows is a selection of some of the doctrinal changes that were made by Jospeh Rutherford. For further information on the many doctrinal and organisational changes Rutherford introduced, it is recommended that you refer to two publications which can be found online. First one, The Desolation of the Sanctuary by Emil and Otto Sadlak, and the second one, When Pastor Russell Died, by the Dawn Bible Students Association. The abandonment of several core doctrines under Rutherford's presidency prompted the Watchtower Bible Tract Society to cease publication of all 7 volumes of Studies in the Scriptures, this includes the finished mystery, in 1927, and distribution of the remaining stock ended in 1929. Rutherford, as has been seen, contrary to Pastor Russell's wishes, proceeded to print many other publications in place of Russell's, most all containing contradictions and outright repudiations of Russell's writings. In 1931, those remaining loyal to Rutherford adopted a new sectarian name, in contradiction of Charles Taze Russell's position of being non-sectarian, the name being Jehovah's Witnesses. At this point in time, 1931, may be considered as the definitive split between Russell's Bible student movement and this new sectarian group founded by Jospeh Franklin Rutherford. At a convention in Columbus, Ohio, July 26, 1931, a resolution was presented to the audience to adopt this new sectarian name, which was apparently enthusiastically received. The mystery surrounding the meaning of the J and W that appeared on the convention programme now being finished. At this juncture, we would do well to reflect on what Pastor Russell wrote in Zion's Watchtower, 1883, in the question and answers found on page 6. Question: would not an earnest, aggressive organisation or sect built upon scriptural lines be the best means of spreading and publishing the real good tidings? That we must have fellowship and sympathy, union is strength. It is not the skirmishers that win the battle, but the disciplined and solid battalions. Answer: we believe that a visible organisation and the adopting of some particular name would tend to increase our numbers and make us appear more respectable in the estimation of the world. The natural man can see that a visible organised body with a definite purpose is a thing more or less of power. Therefore they esteem the various organisations from which we have come out, in obedience to the Master's call. But the natural man cannot understand how a company of people with no organisation which they can see is ever going to accomplish anything. As they look upon us, they regard us simply as a few scattered skirmishers, a peculiar people, with very peculiar ideas and hopes, but not worthy of special notice. But though it is impossible for the natural man to see our organisation because he cannot understand the things of the Spirit of God, we trust that you can see that the true church is most effectually organised and is in the best possible working order. The Apostle Paul urges all to unity of faith and purpose. All, led by the Spirit, may and do come to a knowledge of the same truth. Under our captain, all the truly sanctified, however few or far separated in person, are closely united by the Spirit of Christ, in faith, hope and love, and in following the Master's command, and are moving in solid battalions for the accomplishment of his purpose. But bear in mind, God is not dependent upon numbers. Recognizing this organisation, which is of the Spirit, and desiring no assimilation whatever with the worldly, who cannot see or understand it, we are quite willing to bear the reproach of a peculiar people. We always refuse to be called by any other name than that of our head, Christians, continually claiming that there can be no division among those continually led by his Spirit, an example as made known through his word, we disown none of our Lord's dear children. The weakest child of the household of faith in Christ our Redeemer, we gladly recognize as our brother. Some in ignorance of their privilege of the communion of saints are mixed with the various worldly organizations to their great detriment. Though we cannot follow them there, we gladly welcome them when they come out among us. Wherever we have hope of finding any such in the various nominal churches, etc., we tell them the good tidings of great joy, and by word and example say, "Come out from among them, the worldly though professing Christians, and be ye separate." How could we deliver this message if we were not obeying it? We have unbounded faith in our captain, and this perfect organization, invisible to the world, marches on to certain and glorious victory. From victory unto victory his army he shall lead, till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. It is plain to see that Charles Taze Russell was well aware of the power a large visible organisation could bring, and what it could accomplish. Yet he declined this route for the reasons outlined in the article just quoted. J.F. Rutherford, while seeming to accept this position for some time while Charles Taze Russell lived, soon began to deviate from these truths. Joseph Rutherford, therefore, is the man and the mind behind the Watchtower Bible Tract Society as it exists today. The Jehovah's Witness organisation is a product of his creation. Jospeh Franklin Rutherford died at the age of 72 on January 8, 1942, at his residence in California known as Beth Sarim, House of Princes, a property that was supposedly built for the soon-to-be resurrected ancient worthies, Abraham, Joseph, David, etc., to live in. Rutherford spent winters there due to the fact he had suffered a serious bout of pneumonia, being left with only one lung, following his release from prison in 1919 for issues related to what had been printed in The Finnish Mystery. The deed of the property, which appeared in the March 19, 1930 issue of the Golden Age, granted the right for any person connected with the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, with Rutherford's approval, the right to reside on the premises until King David or others mentioned in Hebrews made an appearance and proved their identity to an officer of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. At any rate, the Society sold the property sometime in 1948, as it apparently proved too expensive to maintain. Rutherford wanted to be buried on the property of Beth Sarim, and this request led to a dispute with the local authorities, who denied it. He was buried 3 months later at Woodrow Cemetery on Staten Island. Frank Shallieu's Old Testament studies have some interesting commentary connected to the account of Uzzah clutching the ark and King David's reaction to this, and how this relates to those in position of leadership. The account is found at 2 Samuel 6, 7-11. It reads in part, "Down through history, the weaknesses of the true leaders of the Lord's people, such as the messengers to the church, were sometimes exposed, and a study of their lives indicates how they reacted to those experiences. By their subsequent changed conduct, we know they not only repented but also reformed, and thus they showed the true metal of their character. Some people, in being used of the Lord, get inflated with a sense of their own importance and significance in their work and ministry, forgetting that providence afforded them the opportunity of doing good. They get so entrenched in their position of importance and influence that they begin to do things not authorized in the Lord's word, and thus incur the full penalty of second death for their actions. Being in a position of enlightenment and leadership, they should know better, and the judgment is more severe. To abuse or misuse knowledge is a serious matter. Getting heady or not holding the head can lead to destruction. Uzzah should not have tried to steady the ark, and neither should we. The principle is to be careful that we do not overstep the boundaries in doctrinal matters. It is the sin against knowledge that incurs great responsibility. A spiritually minded person who understands the doctrines of the Lord's presence, for example, and then forsakes the way, is in a more dangerous situation than one who never had that understanding. In short, Uzzah represents a knowledgeable class that willfully disobeys its spiritual matters and thus goes into second death. The Watchtower Society, which was created by Russell for the express purpose of printing and distributing his literature even after his death, has completely disowned many of his scriptural teachings in favour of the ever-changing doctrines of Rutherford and others. The Studies in the Scriptures series, and many other publications written by Charles Taze Russell, are now seen to be nothing more than museum pieces to be put on display behind protective glass in their museum that was built alongside their new headquarters in Warwick, New York, for the benefit of visitors. Our pastor's dying message, setting the house in order. We have followed Brother Rutherford's advice in Harvest Siftings and have read with profit the article of our pastor published in the November 1st, 1916 Watchtower entitled The Hour of Temptation. In fact, so impressed have we been by it and so convinced that it has a special application at this time that we have copied a portion of it, adding the word society after the word classes where the latter appears. The selection of improper leaders is evidently a sin, and quite a reflection against the classes who have the improper leaders. How could such get into positions to represent the Lord's people except by the latter's votes? When will the Lord's people learn that ability to talk in public is only one of the qualifications of an elder? Time and again we have noted how the Lord's cause has been hindered, and spirituality among the brethren has been stifled by attempts to imitate the nominal church in putting forward persons glib of tongue, lacking in spirituality. In such a case, is it not pride on the part of the class, society, a desire to make a fair show in the flesh before the world? If not, why do they elect such persons? If they have made a mistake, why do they not at once rectify it in a quiet and positive manner? When elders seek to bring the class, society, under their power and control and succeed, does it not show the class, society, lacks the very quality that the Lord tells us he desires to see, courage, overcoming? And does the class, society, not injure such a would-be ruler as well as itself by permitting him to succeed in his unscriptural methods, deceiving and being deceived? We have already alluded to the ambitious and selfish spirit in the world leading to anarchy, and we have just pointed out how the same selfish, ambitious spirit is leading to anarchy in the church. We foresee a time of trouble for the world upon this score, and a time of trouble also for the church. The world cannot purge itself of this class, for the leaders and the led have the worldly spirit, which is sure to wax worse and worse, but not so in the church of Christ. Ours is the spirit of the Master, the spirit of loyalty to truth, the spirit of the golden rule, spirit of brotherly love, the spirit of liberty and helpfulness, the spirit of fidelity to what we believe to be the truth. It is inexcusable for the Church, possessed of this spirit, to continue under the domination of ambitious men, and sometimes ambitious women, if they have not been conducting their class, society, affairs along proper lines. Should they not begin at once? We believe this is the time in which to set the house of the Lord in order. But some will say, we would have a great disturbance if we attempted to do anything contrary to the wishes of those who have fastened themselves upon us as our leaders and rulers. To make a move at all would endanger a division of the class, society, and how could we think of anything which would result in that catastrophe? But, we inquire, which would be better, to have a smaller class, society, operating along the lines which the Lord has indicated, or a larger class, society, upholding principles contrary to the Lord's provisions, injuring themselves, hindering their influence, and encouraging as a leader one who is either a wolf or else a sheep which has been mistakenly misled into the wolf spirit? We encourage all the dear brethren who are in such trouble to be very heroic, to see that they do nothing from strife or vainglory, but everything in the spirit of meekness and love, that they may get back again to the liberty wherewith Christ made free, and not be again entangled in any human bondage.
Alleluia, what a